The world did not collapse with bombs. It collapsed with silence. No sirens, no emergency summit, no breaking news banner, just numbers quietly disappearing from a budget sheet. In 2025, more people were starving than ever before, and less help arrived than at any point in nearly a decade. This was not because the world ran out of food, or medicine, or trucks. It ran out of will. Governments didn't deny the crisis. They acknowledged it, then they walked away. Aid was cut, programs were frozen, workers were laid off, food was taken from the hungry to save the dying, children lost meals, refugees lost rations, aid workers lost their lives. All of it happened in plain sight. If you believe humanitarian aid is charity, you're missing the story. If you think it's generosity, you're already behind. This was a system failure, a political choice, a moment when the global safety net tore. If you want to understand why 2025 became the worst humanitarian year on record, we need to start before the collapse. Before the cuts, before the silence, we need to look at how the world planned for help and why that plan was doomed. The humanitarian system did not fail suddenly. It failed on paper first. Every year, the world plans its compassion in advance. Forecasts, charts, targets how many people will suffer, where, and how much it will cost to keep them alive. For 2025, the numbers were staggering. Nearly 200 million people in need across dozens of crises. From war, from climate, from collapse, the plan assumed something critical. The donors would show up not heroically, not generously, just predictably. Because this system does not run on hope, it runs on commitments. Governments knew the wars were unresolved. They knew hunger was rising. They knew aid workers were under attack. And yet the plan moved forward as if stability still existed. As if political will was intact. As if the floor would hold. It didn't. To understand why, we have to step back into the years that reshaped humanitarian aid itself. Because the seeds of 2025 were planted long before 2025 arrived. That story begins with crisis stacking and a system stretched past its limits. The humanitarian system was not built for permanence. It was built for shocks, short wars, temporary displacement, crises that end. But the last decade broke that logic. Emergencies stopped ending. They stacked. COVID didn't replace conflict. It layered on top of it. Then came Ukraine, a full-scale war. In the heart of Europe, costs exploded overnight. Food, fuel, transport, helping one family suddenly cost twice as much. Governments responded at first. They opened their wallets. Global aid spending surged. By 2022, funding hit record highs. The system stretched, but it held. Then new fires ignited. Gaza, Sudan, climate disasters across continents. Needs rose again. Appeals grew larger. But patience did not. Donor governments began to pull back quietly, incrementally. Budgets tightened. Austerity returned. Domestic politics took priority. The system didn't collapse yet, but the margin disappeared. By late 2024, humanitarian aid was running on fumes, one shock away from failure. And that shock was political. It arrived faster than anyone expected. The collapse did not arrive slowly. It arrived with a signature. January 2025, a new administration, a single executive order. U.S. foreign assistance was paused, not reduced, paused. No new obligations. A 90-day review. Then stop work orders. Across the world, programs froze overnight. Clinics closed. Food distribution stopped mid-cycle. Contracts were suspended without warning. Aid workers waited for guidance. None came. Days later, the damage spread. Websites went dark. Payment systems stalled. confusion turned into paralysis. For decades, the United States had carried the system, not perfectly, but decisively, nearly 40% of global humanitarian funding. Gone at the moment it was needed most. Other donors watched. Then followed some cited budgets, others politics. Most said nothing at all. This was not a cut, it was a rupture. If you think one government can't break a global system, this is where that belief died. When the money vanished, the system didn't collapse evenly. It recalculated. Humanitarian aid is triage by design. When resources shrink, choices harden. Not everyone can be saved. So priorities are rewritten. First came the hiring freezes, then layoffs, thousands of staff gone, experience walked out the door. Local knowledge vanished with it. Budgets were reprogrammed. Food cut here, shelter delayed there. Aid agencies made a decision no one should have to make. Take food from the hungry. To save the starving, this is how famine begins in spreadsheets. Calories reduced, rations halved, coverage narrowed, entire regions slipped below survival thresholds. Meanwhile, danger rose. Aid workers were attacked more often and killed more frequently, not by militias alone, but by states. The rules that once protected humanitarian space stopped working. Convoys became targets, neutrality became irrelevant, and still the needs kept rising. By mid-2025, the system was no longer responding to crises. It was managing collapse. The worst effects weren't visible yet, but they were coming, and they would land on people with no margin left. By the middle of 2025, the consequences could no longer be hidden. The numbers broke records, then broke norms. More people were hungry than ever before, hundreds of millions, but aid was reaching fewer people. Not slightly fewer, tens of millions fewer. 2 famines were declared in a single year. For the first time this century, that fact alone should have triggered everything. Emergency funding, political pressure, global outrage. It didn't. Food was rerouted, programs were suspended, entire populations were deprioritized. Not because they mattered less, but because there wasn't enough left. At the same time, danger exploded. Aid workers were killed at unprecedented rates. In just 6 months, more were killed than in many full years before. And this was not random violence. States were now responsible for many of the deaths. Governments, armies, those meant to uphold humanitarian law. Gaza became the deadliest place on earth for aid workers. Ukraine followed. So did other conflicts. This changed everything. If the people enforcing the rules are now the threat, there is no safe space left. The system crossed a line in 2025. From strained to unsustainable, and the people paying the price were not abstract. They were families, children, people just like you. That is where this crisis becomes personal. This is where the crisis reaches you. Not as policy, not as numbers, as a human being. If you are a refugee in 2025, there is no buffer left. No second option, no backup plan. In camps across the world, food rations were cut in half, sometimes more. $6 a month. That's what survival was reduced to. If you are a parent, you skip meals first, so your child can eat. Until there is nothing left to skip. If you are a child, hunger doesn't just hurt, it changes you. Brains don't fully recover. Bodies don't fully grow. Those losses are permanent. If you are stateless, there is no government to fall back on. Aid is not support, it is life itself. And when it disappears, so do futures. You were told help would come. You were counted, then you were crossed off. This is not distant suffering. It is manufactured neglect. Humanitarian collapse does not stay local. It never has. When aid disappears, pressure moves. Across borders, across regions, across politics. Hunger drives migration, not ideology, not ambition, survival. When camps fail, people move. When food ends, borders strain. Neighboring countries absorb the shock first. Then the system reacts. Walls rise. Politics harden. Conflicts don't cool. They spread. Extremist groups recruit where aid once stabilized. Armed actors fill vacuums left by relief agencies. Humanitarian space closes. Security costs rise. Wars become harder to end. Meanwhile, global credibility erodes. If aid depends on politics, then neutrality is fiction. If international law cannot protect aid workers, it cannot protect civilians either. 2025 sent a signal the world has never sent before. That survival is conditional and protection is optional. Once that message spreads, it cannot be recalled. The humanitarian system was meant to prevent chaos. Instead, its collapse accelerates it. And now the world faces a question it has avoided for decades. What happens next? That answer depends on the future. And there are only three paths forward. The future of humanitarian aid does not hinge on optimism. It hinges on choice. There are three paths ahead. The first is repair. Governments reverse course. Funding stabilizes. Emergency gaps are filled. Lives are saved. But the system stays fragile. The next shock would bring us back here again. The second path is drift. Aid limps forward, always underfunded, always reactive. Crises are managed just enough to avoid headlines, but not enough to restore dignity. This becomes the new normal. Permanent emergency, permanent scarcity. Then there is the third path, collapse. Aid becomes selective, political, transactional. Those with strategic value receive help. Those without disappear from the map. Hunger deepens. Migration accelerates. Conflict expands. The humanitarian system survives in name only. None of these futures are inevitable, but all are plausible. And the direction will not be decided by speeches or pledges. It will be decided by whether the world accepts 2025 as an anomaly or a precedent. Because once a line is crossed, it is easier to cross it again. That brings us to the final question. What do we do with what we now know? 2025 was not a failure of resources. It was a failure of resolve. The world did not lose the ability to save lives. It lost the habit. What broke this year was not logistics or coordination or knowledge. It was the belief that some lines should never be crossed. Once aid becomes optional, so does humanity. Once survival depends on politics, no one is truly safe. This story is not about distant places or people you will never meet. It is about what kind of world we are building quietly, through budgets, through silence, through delay. If 2025 becomes the new normal, then hunger is policy and neglect is strategy. But precedents can be rejected, systems can be rebuilt, rules can be enforced, and solidarity can be chosen again, only if it is demanded. If this opened your eyes, don't let it end here. Share this, question it, talk about it, because the next collapse won't announce itself either. And by the time it does, it may already be too late.